The base model 2020 MacBook Pro is nearly identical to the base model 2019 MacBook Pro. So the question is, what are the differences between these two machines and which one should you buy? For about the past 5 months, I've been advising you guys not to buy the 2019 base model MacBook Pro. And that's not to say that this is a bad computer. In fact, I like it a lot. However, we've known two things for quite a while now. Number one is that Apple was going to be bringing the Magic Keyboard to the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and number two is that Apple was going to double the storage options. This is something that they did on the 16-inch MacBook Pro and then again on the MacBook Air. So we've known for quite a while that that was going to happen. Now, if we're talking about buying a brand new MacBook, the $1,299 entry-level model, it's a no-brainer to wait, and that's what I've been saying. You're gonna get a better keyboard, and you're gonna get twice the storage at the same price. Even if the internals are the same, which they turned out to be, it is an objectively better buy than 128 gigabytes and a butterfly keyboard. So if you're buying new either through Apple or another retailer, this is your obvious choice. However, something interesting is happening, and that is, of course, the 2019 still exists, and there is still plenty of clearance, open box, and used inventory out there at a pretty noticeable discount over the new model, and it's gonna come with the exact same performance and specifications. So the question is it worth saving a couple $100s and going for the old one, or is the new one good enough to justify spending that extra money? So to start, let's break down the external and internal differences between these two MacBooks. Now, from the outside, they are extremely similar. The footprint is exactly the same. The new MacBook Pro is 1 millimeter or 0.02 inches thicker than the old one. It is very slightly noticeable if you put them side by side, but if you don't have both computers next to you, you're not going to notice a difference between these two in terms of their size and weight. It should be noted that the thickness difference is only in the lower half of the computer. The displays are literally the exact same part. When we open up the machines, there are some very, very subtle differences, and I'm only talking about these for the purposes of being very, very thorough. There is no functional difference between them, but the speaker grills on the 13-inch MacBook Pro are a little bit narrower. They have 10 little holes across, whereas the old model has 11. They're also ever so slightly taller. It's one extra row of holes taller. Another thing that's different is the trackpad on the 2020 has edges that are rounded ever so slightly more than the 2019 one, and the trackpad is actually ever so slightly narrower than the old model. Now, obviously the main difference on the inside is the new keyboard, which has better key travel and better key feel. We also have a dedicated escape key and a separated matte finish Touch ID button. Personally, I think this is a pretty nice feature. The Touch ID button doesn't really matter, but having a dedicated escape key is definitely a huge benefit that we noticed first back with the 16-inch MacBook Pro, so it's good to see that make a comeback here on the 13-inch. Now, one thing that I haven't been able to get a conclusive answer on so far is whether the speakers and mic are new. A lot of people say that they aren't, and Apple didn't really talk about it, but to my ear, the speakers on the 2020 do actually sound better than the 2019 ones. Take a listen. The differences are very subtle and it might be hard for you to hear them, but the 2020 has a little bit more bass and the sound sounds a little bit more full and immersive. Now, as far as the webcam, these things are going to be exactly the same, but I did notice that the microphones don't sound the same, and it's a little bit strange. Take a look. Alright, so here's a video and audio comparison between the 2020 MacBook Pro and the 2019 MacBook Pro. Now both of these should have the same camera, and in fact I didn't remember seeing anything about a different mic array, but we'll actually find out if they sound any different or if they sound pretty much the same. The 2020 sounds worse than the 2019 to me. It sounds a little bit more muffled and not quite as crisp. I mean, neither of them sound as good as like the 16-inch MacBook Pro with the 3-mic array. That one is obviously like the king of laptop microphones and speakers. But it's kind of weird that they didn't really change anything, or at least they didn't tell us that they changed anything, yet the speakers sound better and the microphone sounds worse. I don't get it. Alright, so let's discuss the performance differences between these two computers. And one thing that I've been wondering, and that a lot of you guys have been wondering too, is whether we have a similar situation to the 16-inch with the performance on this guy. So if you don't know, the 16-inch used the exact same processors as the 2019 15-inch MacBook Pro, but because it had a better thermal architecture and more cooling capacity, it was able to get more performance from these same processors. Now the reason that that was possible on the 16-inch is because Apple increased the thickness and increased the heatsink size. That didn't happen here. This is nearly identical in terms of the internal design, and the cooling is exactly the same. The only change in thickness is to accommodate the new keyboard. So there's no other changes. The battery size is exactly the same, whereas the 16-inch had a larger battery than the 15. We have the exact same cooling, the same heatsink, all of that. So the performance is pretty much exactly the same as the 2019. Although, weirdly enough, I did notice that on average, this guy runs about 1% faster. It was pretty consistent in Cinebench that we were scoring about 20 points higher than the 2019 across all tests. Even as the scores went down, they went down by the same amounts, and this one was regularly 1% faster. It's a difference that no one would ever notice and really doesn't mean anything, but that's how granular we're having to get here to find differences between these two computers. One thing that was not granular was the difference in the SSD performance. The 2020 is about 500 megabytes per second faster in both the read and write tests. That's something that you would definitely notice, especially if you're opening large files or transferring documents to an external drive, something like that. So those are the differences between these two extraordinarily similar laptops. And now the question is, which one of them should you buy? Is it worth suffering through the butterfly keyboard to save a few $100s for the exact same specifications? And what makes this very interesting is actually Apple's refurbished store. You can buy the base model 2019 for $980. That's with the 128 gigabyte SSD. And at that price point, you're saving a decent amount, over $300 from buying a new one. And sure, you're getting less storage, but you're getting the exact same hardware. So you gotta wonder at that point, maybe the butterfly keyboard isn't so bad if I can save over $300. However, what I think is actually even more interesting is the step up from that. If you get the refurbished one with 256 gigabytes, Apple sells those for $1,059. So, $240 less than new. The only difference, aside from like the speakers and the other minor things that we talked about, is the keyboard. So if you're looking at the base model 2020 MacBook Pro, you gotta ask yourself, this keyboard is great, obviously, no question about that. But if I wanna save some money, could I survive with a butterfly keyboard to save $240? The way I see it, if you're prepared to spend the $1,300 or $1,200 with the education discount to get one of these new, go for it. It might be tempting to save the money, but in the long run, you really can't trust a butterfly keyboard, even if it's not the worst to type on. The 2019 is honestly not bad. It's the best version of the butterfly keyboard that exists, and it's not as bad as the other ones, but I still don't trust it for a long-term use scenario. So I think this is definitely worth it. Where it could get interesting is if you can't afford the base model MacBook Pro and you're looking at the MacBook Air, but you need some more performance, this is not a terrible idea. Now, of course, make sure you're subscribed because I'm going to be comparing the 2020 MacBook Pro to the 2020 MacBook Air. So, of course, be subscribed. That video is going to come out tomorrow, so you won't have to wait very long for that. But more importantly for this video, I think with this comparison, there are some cases where I would say the 2019 actually might make sense. If you can get one of them with 256 gigs for under $1,000, I would say that's a pretty decent price point. If you can afford to go for the Magic Keyboard, do it. It's gonna help you out in the long run. But if you need to save the money, this is still a decent option. Now, building off of that, someone asked me a very good question on Twitter, and that was if this new MacBook Pro is going to cause the 2019s to depreciate quickly. And that's based off of what happened back in 2019 when the 16-inch MacBook Pro came out. Basically, that computer was such a good upgrade. It wasn't a huge redesign, but it had better cooling, better keyboard, much better graphics, bigger screen, and less cost in terms of upgrades for storage. And it was so good with all of those different factors that it basically meant that the older 15-inch MacBook Pros, the higher-end ones, were obsolete. Why would you spend $3,000 on one of those when you could get a brand new 16-inch that's faster for less? And so what happened was the 15-inch MacBook Pros lost a ton of value overnight because the 16-inch was just so good. It set a price cap. That's probably not going to happen here. In fact, I think kind of the opposite is going to happen, where because these have the same internals as the new model, they're probably not going to depreciate by as much as they normally would. Certainly no one out there with a 2019 is going to upgrade to a 2020. Except for me, but that doesn't really count. In fact, you can already see this happening. It costs more to buy one of these used on eBay in a lot of cases than it does to buy it refurbished from Apple with a warranty. Who knew? So real quick before we wrap up this video, I just want to quickly touch on the higher end 13-inch MacBook Pros. This video focused more on the low-end entry-level comparison, but a lot of people have been asking me if the higher-end configurations are worth it, and basically, here's my rule of thumb. Don't spend more than $2,000 if you spec out one of these 13-inch MacBook Pros. Once you get to $2,000, you really need to consider a 16-inch. Even if you load this thing up with the Core i7 and 32 gigabytes of RAM, you're still going to be limited at quad cores, you're still going to be limited by integrated graphics. Every single version of the 16-inch MacBook Pro is going to have better graphics and CPU performance than even the most expensive 13-inch. So once you get to $2,000, really ask yourself, is the portability more important than the performance? If you absolutely need the most portable MacBook Pro that you can find, go for the 13. But if you need performance, the 16-inch is a fantastic option. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts are on this comparison. Is the 2019, the butterfly keyboard really that bad? Is it worth saving some money? Let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to stay tuned and stay subscribed so you can catch the comparison to the MacBook Air that'll drop tomorrow. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and check out my subreddit, which is linked in the description below. And with that, I will see you all in the next video.